And I need screen sharing again, please. If questions come, is this on Facebook also? So if questions come in, well, you put them in the chat.
Yes, or we will just say them aloud. So
okay, so when they come in, I'll leave the chat open. Just send them to me, please.
Okay.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. It's always an unusual honor to speak at 26 Second Avenue. As they say, that's where it all began. And I first went to 26 Second Avenue. I've told the story before, around 1968, because I'd seen the devotees chanting Jayadvaita Swami and others in the village. And I was curious. Finally, I found out where they were. There was no Googling. And when I went there, they had just moved down the street. It took me months to find where they were. And they'd moved down the street. And at that point in ISKCON, the sign had not yet been invented. We moved down the street to this address. That was an invention that wasn't going to come for decades later. So, but 26 Second Avenue always fascinated me because we all know when we get there, it's like for those who might be fans of Doctor Who, I'm not asking who you are, but some of you might have seen it. He has this box, a TARDIS that travels. And the unique feature of it is it's bigger on the inside than the outside. I mean, you can fit a whole house in it, but it's the size of an English phone booth. And in a similar way, 26 Second Avenue is like that. It's much bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Because when you look in, it's just this tiny little place. But so many people were jammed in there, especially in the days Prabhupada was starting. And so much went on there that whenever I'm there, I'm always amazed how small it is. And it's like that. It's bigger on the inside. And when you look at it, it looks so small, but so much came out of it. So it's a special privilege to be at 26 Second Avenue. I see my friend Yadunath is on here, who he's been so active in trying to keep 26 Second Avenue alive. So that's it's really appreciated. So we'll go on to today's verse. And today's verse is in this interesting second chapter of the Gita. Now, the Gita, for those of you, I think everyone on here is likely familiar with the Gita, but if you're not, the Gita takes place in about 30 minutes. It takes a little longer to read it, but it was a conversation. I assume they speak Sanskrit fast, I don't know. But it was a conversation right before a battle. It's a historical place. I've been to that historical place, Kurukshetra, north of New Delhi. And in that battle, one of the great generals, Arjuna, really has an existential crisis. I do not want to fight. I don't want to kill my relatives, kind of like an American Civil War. I don't know my duty in life. Maybe I'll go off in the woods and be a yogi. And all of us ought to go through these existential crises. They're very healthy. I mean, when I was in college, right before exam time, I was always wonder, why am I here? This place is horrible. And I'm sure Atma, right before he took his bar exam, was thinking, is this really what I want to do? Yeah, so much suffering and all. Did you feel that way, Atma?
Well, I was thinking, is it really possible that after the type of efforts that I made in preparation of the bar exam, that I could actually pass it? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, we go through these existential crises. We all go through it. So don't think that Arjuna is so different from us. He is going through an existential crisis. Why am I here? What's it about? What's going on? Maybe I should go to the woods. Have any of you ever felt like just going to the woods? I have. My whole youth, I would, due to a disability, I would hang out in the woods all the time. I just had to get away from people. So to get away from people, I hung out in the woods. And there I started thinking about philosophical matters. I was very lucky to have had that experience. I'm sure all of you have had that experience where you just realize, is this really worth it, what I'm doing? So we are in the middle of an existential crisis. So the first chapter sets the stage. In the second chapter, the whole contents of the Gita are summarized. Krishna summarized Arjuna. And we're getting to the very conclusion of the second chapter where it's all summarized. Then after that, Arjuna starts asking a lot of questions, which I hope you do. And with these questions, Krishna kind of expands upon the themes of this second chapter and lets Arjuna know what it's really all about. In this verse, which is 71, next to last verse, up into this point, Krishna has been explaining to our Arjuna quite a few verses on, hey, let's get focused. Give up your sense gratification. Without peace, there's not going to be happiness. And without controlling your senses, there isn't going to be any peace. And he talks of, gives a really, there's a lot of clever metaphors. One of the metaphors is that of a tortoise or turtle. When it's under duress, it pulls its head and its tail and its legs into the shell. And there's a very hard shell, and very few creatures can do any harm to it. So he gives the example. Try to, just as a tortoise withdraws its limb, so withdraw your senses from the sense objects. Then you'll be protected. Talking about restricting sense enjoyment and how dangerous the senses are and how lust can lead us into degradation and anger and misery. Says, okay, you got to control the senses. And he finally says, before we get to this verse, that one whose senses are restrained is certainly of steady intelligence. So, Vihaya kamanya sarvan pumas charati nispara nirmano nirankara sasatam abhigachati. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification. And all of you who have done that, please raise your hand, and you don't have to listen to the rest of the class. Okay. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship. I don't own anything, and is devoid. And here is the key word. This is the word of the day. False ego, ahankara, nira ahankara. One who has given up false ego, he alone can attain peace. So I'll read some of the purport. To become desireless, that means not have desires, means not to desire anything for sense gratification. Now, I've been with yogis who try to be desireless. Doesn't work very well. The mind is always wandering. The mind's always going, oh, I have no desires whatsoever. There was one, Prabhupada described what happens to the Mayavadis. Mayavadis are really good at this. They really have techniques, be it Zen or whatever, to get rid of their desires. So what do? Well, they withdraw their senses like a tortoise. They do these things. But because they haven't had the key, which we'll get to in a little bit, their desires come back. So there was one very famous American yogi, and he went to India and he meditated very deeply, and he felt he had received some kind of enlightenment. He understood the one behind the many. I think he really did. And then he came back to America. And when he came back, he wrote a book. And the book was quite incredible to me, because the book, he did exactly what Prabhupada said the yogis do. Prabhupada said that when the yogis are, after all their meditation, they end up doing mundane philanthropic activities because they've reached some mode of goodness by controlling the senses, but they haven't reached the transcendental platform, so they do mundane goodness. So when he got back to America, he wrote a book, and the name of the book was After the Enlightenment, There is the Laundry, meaning you have to do the mundane thing. So after enlightenment, you still got to do your laundry. And then the conclusion of the book is you ought to be nice to people. Rodney King, who started all those riots, he was beaten up by some cops in Los Angeles maybe 20 years ago. It was unfortunate. They shouldn't have done it, but somebody videoed it, and then it was shown. And then there were all kinds of huge riots in Los Angeles. And Rodney King then came out with this famous saying, "Why can't we all just get along?" And he sued him, earned millions of dollars in the police department. And then I think he died in a dumpster, unfortunately, because he never raised his consciousness. So why can't we all get along? Because we can't get along unless we raise our consciousness. Simple as that. Raising the consciousness requires a certain degree of sense control. Now, there's some easy ways to get there. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So desire, in other words, desire for becoming Krishna consciousness is actually desireless. Every one of you is on this call because you have desire to either know more or become Krishna conscious. So at this moment, you're all desireless. That's pretty good. Congratulate yourself. Pat yourself on the back. You're here. That means you've done the first step in being desireless. To understand one's actual position as the eternal servitor of Krishna without falsely claiming the material body to be oneself, and without falsely claiming ownership, proprietorship over anything in the world, is a perfect stage. One who is situated in this perfect stage knows that because Krishna is a proprietor, therefore everything must be used for his satisfaction. Arjuna did not want to fight for his own senses, but when he became fully Krishna conscious, that's jumping ahead in the story, he did fight. So we're going to do a little talk about some of the issues of ego, because what is this? We're talking about being desireless without false ego. So let us, for just 5 minutes, explore the ego. Here it is. Okay, you see the screen, edging God out? That's what ego is, E-G-O, it's edging God out. So that's the way you remember. Whenever you have, your ego is in, you're edging God out. And most of the quarrels in the world that erupt between people stem from ego. Now, there's a famous Harvard professor says most corporate executives are one giant ego with a couple of arms and legs sticking out. Very good metaphor. A majority of executives who lose their jobs do so not because they're incompetent, because of interpersonal issues. Now, I'm co-director of ISKCON Resolve, and I also mediate matters internally in the city of Gainesville. And I can say that from my experience in ISKCON and my experience in, you might say, the world outside of ISKCON, there is hardly a difference. It's just a time of quarrel and conflict everywhere. Braja Bihari and I were meeting with our wonderful mentor for all our ombudsman mediation work. We were meeting with her Friday. And we asked her this question: what do we do about people who just see everything as black and white? You can't discuss it. I have to deal with a lot of anti-vaxxers, and the city was about to blow up over anti-vaxxers. So I had to negotiate a peace between the union and the city. And a lot of people, probably on both sides, you couldn't even talk to. And we see that a lot. And our mentor, Mary, said to us, it's not just you. I'm talking to ombudsmen and mediators all over the country and all over the world. And it's really like that. Things are just coming apart at the seams. So some of you who are very cloistered in ISKCON think it's just ISKCON, this and that problem arises. They're coming apart. And the only solution to this is to rise above it. So we'll go on here. Ego. Ego is driven, the first line is really the essence, by underlying feelings of insecurity and self-doubt. I don't know who I am. Therefore, my ego blossoms. It brings pride. It's a persistent feeling of self-elation, of, how important I am. It's our defense against being rejected. When our ego gets, we don't even want to admit mistakes and be humble. We'll get to that. It's this insecurity and pride. So, oops, I went too far. We'll go back one. The opposite of ego is self-respect. This is a very important point, because it's very easy to think I'll give up ego, but if I don't have self-respect, then I become sort of useless. And we're going to get to the slide after this. We'll discuss a very important point that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati made. So we have ego versus self-respect. If we don't have self-respect, then eventually our ego will will replace it. In other words, if we think we give up ego, but we don't cultivate self-respect, then our ego will fill that void. Self-respect is driven by feelings of self-worth. I am an eternal servant of Krishna. That does have value. It gives me sense control. Here I have self-control. Self-respect is a balance between what I feel and what others feel. If I'm very concerned what others feel, but I have to think, how does it impact me? And if it impacts me in a false ego way, then my pride goes there. But if it impacts me in a way that I can use that to raise my consciousness, for example, if I'm giving a class and say Yadunath has his camera off, but let's say he's making faces at me, wondering what's going on with this class, where's it going? And so that could be driven by some false ego. In order to get past that false ego, he has to be concerned, well, what do others feel? But he also has to be concerned, we have to be concerned with what do we feel? And you're going to see why in a minute. I just want to leave that thought so you can see why in a minute. Self-respect results in developing a better personality. It makes the person self-dependent. It makes us be able to do something without thinking ourselves superior. Now, here we have a quote from Bhaktisiddhanta. 1 second here. I missed a slide. I'm sorry. Here we go. A bad day for the ego is a good day for the soul. It's a nice motto. Triniyapi sunechana. One should be humbler than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree. The meaning of Trinati api sunichana is not disingenuous. This is Bhakti Siddhanta, merely flaunting a show of humility. All of us have been, especially among devotees, we cultivate humility, where someone says, I am so fallen. One devotee went to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, I am the most fallen. And Prabhupada said to him, you're not the most anything. Smash the false ego. That's one of my favorite lines. Prabhupada has these brilliant lines. So merely flaunting a show of humility, it means actual eligibility for kirtan by a taste for the holy name and considering oneself a servant of the holy name. Service is the gateway to a taste for the holy name. Service to Guru, service to Vaishnavas, that is humbler than a blade of grass. And here's the line that gets very interesting. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati says, we should not become subordinate to non-devotees, but to devotees whom we beg and show respect. What does that mean? We should not be subordinate. Well, he discusses that in the next verse. The Mahajana instructed us not to display humility before everyone. To show humility towards atheists like Ravana and pretentious Brahmins is not Vaishnav Seva. If we transgress this instruction, we will never become qualified to chant the holy name or attain a taste for the holy name. Rather, our actions result in becoming envious of others. I'll tell a story about this. There was Balavanta, a wonderful friend of mine, former GBC. He went to hear this Bhogi yogi speak, and he brought with him some very, very humble brahmachari who just accompanied him. And this devotee typically reminded me of the devotee I used to admire at the LA Rath Yatras in the 80s. In the 80s at the LA Rath Yatra, there was an elephant. They would rent an elephant to be part of the parade. And walking behind the elephant with a bucket and a shovel was the most humble of brahmacharis you can imagine, because you knew what his service was, taking care of the elephant droppings. So that was a humble devotee. And the devotee Balavanta brought with him was like that. He was always cleaning up after everyone, as humble, as meek as you can make a devotee. So they're at this program, and Balavanta is dressed in the devotional paraphernalia. And the speaker, who was an envious rascal, started criticizing Prabhupada. You imagine criticizing Prabhupada. He said, Prabhupada wrote Gita as it is, but that's not really what it is, and going on and just nonsense stuff. So Balavanta said, well, what do I do? I'm just going to walk out. I'm not going to stand here and listen to the insults. And this super humble, meek brahmachari stood up and yelled like a lion, you will not insult my guru. I will not tolerate this. You take that back now. And the guy took it back. He took it back, and Balavanta was astounded because he was thinking, what can I do? Is an auditorium of 1,000 people, I'm going to walk out. And without a microphone, the guy said it so loud, so stunned him, he took it back. And then Balavanta and the brahmachari did walk out, but he did it. So this is the kind of thing. If we're dealing with envious atheists and we act overly humble, that will actually hurt. It will inflame our false ego. So what Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati is saying, we're very humble with the devotees, we're humble with the innocent, but those who are atheists or demoniac, we may have to stand up to them. Take the Bhakti Vedanta Institute, which somehow or other, by a quirk of fate, I'm the director of. And how do we deal with the scientists? That issue comes up all the time. There's one book that many of you may have read called Life Comes from Life. By the way, that book is wrong. Ooh, those are strong words. What do I mean by that? Does anybody know what I mean by that book is wrong? Anybody want to take a guess? Okay. How could a book published by Prabhupada be wrong? Yes.
Well, I never heard that about Life Comes from Life, but I did hear something that sounds like perhaps what you're talking about regarding a book called Dialectical Spiritualism, if I have the title right. And what I understand was wrong about that was in posing questions to Srila Prabhupada that recited some explication about a philosophy or theory propounded by others. It wasn't accurately propounding what that theory or others was. So in saying that say something in a book in which Prabhupada speaks is wrong, it's in no way saying that anything Prabhupada said was wrong. But I assume you're talking about things that were told to Prabhupada that he responded to, that those things told him in a couple cases might have been.
That was a good guess.
Oh.
But no, but a very good guess, very smart. Here's what's wrong about it. Prabhupada never said the words in the book. I have a paper I can share with you on it that we wrote and sent to the BBT. They're going to withdraw the book. Some divisions have. One devotee who's passed away now was really into the science issue, Hamsaduda, I can say. And the conversations Prabhupada had with Sri Damodar, which are brilliant and wonderful and so enlivening, were first translated into German by him. And when he translated it into German, he made Prabhupada much more, as we say, boot in the face of the scientists. Prabhupada would occasionally use that term. But when you read the actual transcripts, which are, they're on the web, the archives has it, it's available to anyone, you can see that Prabhupada was much more nuanced than the book makes it. And the book is actually a heavier version of Prabhupada than Prabhupada was, because that's all Hamsaduda saw it. And then in a weird quirk of fate, and we have the original manuscripts, we have the corrections. The book was never produced in English directly from the tapes. It was produced from the German, translated back to English. And we've traced it out. The misspellings are all the same. Certain places were misspelled in the German edition. They would never be misspelled in the English edition, because these are names of parks in Los Angeles where Prabhupada was walking, Cheviot Hills, places like that. And they're spelled wrong in the German edition and also wrong in English. So Life Comes Life is a wonderful book, and there's a lot of nectar in it. But we analyzed it, and one time we found 5 words that were actually precisely what Prabhupada said. And we couldn't find that. But Dhruta Karma says, I bet I'll find it. And he found one. So, and then we have, and the reason I bring that up is, first, I like devotees to know that that isn't the mood of Prabhupada. Prabhupada wrote in his first book ever was Easy Journey to Other Planets in the late 50s in New York. And he wrote, the scientists, they've done wonderful things. That was when Sputnik went up a satellite, and they're looking at antimatter. He said, but the pinprick is they don't understand consciousness. But they're doing wonderful things. And when I was in Vrindavan in 1977 at the first Life Comes from Life conference, Prabhupada was very happy we're engaging in dialogue with these scientists. He wanted us to do it. The boot in the face was reserved for those only that said life, insisted life came from matter. It was reserved for a very small section of scientists, those who push forth pure atheistic theories without evidence. And that's what we deal with in the BI. But most of the scientists aren't that way. Nowadays, there's so many scientists who understand that consciousness, the famous physicist in England, name just slipped my mind for a second, but he said the hard problem of physics is consciousness. We don't know what it is. And at the BI, that's where we spend most of our time, exploring consciousness. And if somebody doesn't know what it is, or they're bewildered, they're our friends, no boot in the face. It's only that very small section of atheists. So what Prabhupada is saying here, or Bhaktisiddhanta is saying here, is we're not to be humble to atheists. We're able to challenge them, not say, oh, Mr. Atheist, what you said is so nice. Let me think about it. That's all. But that's only a small section. Most of the people are the innocent in the middle. So, greed. So when we're giving up desires, this verse says we have to give up our sense of proprietorship. Proprietorship is based on greed. We find in the Western countries, most people have enough to eat, enough to wear, yet they're so disturbed. The mental health facilities at every college in America right now is overwhelmed. There are 2 mental diseases that have become so prominent, 2 diagnoses of mental disturbance. Can anybody guess what they are? It's not bipolar, it's 2 others. What
Anxiety?
are the 2 extremely common diagnoses at every campus in America now? And every campus, University of Florida, I know well, but every campus, their mental health facility is currently overwhelmed, sometimes months to get an appointment.
ADHD.
That's there, but that's not it.
Depression.
Yes. Who else?
Depression.
Anxiety?
Depression is one. And the other?
Anxiety?
Anxiety, that's it. Anxiety and depression. It's huge. It's overwhelming. A book just came out by this brilliant author, Jonathan Haidt, called The Coddling of the American Mind. And he noticed around 1910, 2 things happened that made those entering college around 2014 the most anxious, depressed generation that we ever know to enter college. 2 things happened in 2010. Really strange things. And they upset people's mind. It's very good for our movement, sadly, because people are so disturbed that they can't get material happiness that they may start looking for higher consciousness. Certainly in the 60s, Prabhupada arrived just at the moment where my generation said, the military industrial complex will not give us happiness. And we were looking for something else. Sometimes we were looking in the wrong places, but that's another matter. So what happened in 2010 to upset the apple cart? 2 things happened. 1, there was an invention, and 2, a button. Any guesses? This is a hard
Social media?
Like button?
The like button. Who said that?
I did, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin. Good job, Kevin. The like button on Facebook. And 2010, it was social media, but it was the iPhone, the mechanism for the social media. When the iPhone started becoming ubiquitous, and then the Androids, but the smartphone, or dumb phone, as I like to call it, became ubiquitous, and the like button came, that generation of high schoolers that all of a sudden had to deal with their identity being determined by like buttons, developed huge phobias and great anxiety, much more so among women than men. And then the college campuses became overwhelmed with anxiety and depression, and it's still there. So these 2 things happen. It's well documented. And so people are greedy. They want more. They want to be the prettiest, the smartest, the richest. They can't get it. They get frustrated. depressed, and anxiety. And finally, we'll conclude. And the only solution that Krishna gives to this is everything in the universe is owned by the Lord. So we only accept our quota, as the Isa Upanishad says. That's our quota. Now, for my god brother Ambarish, his quota is millions of dollars. For somebody else, it may be a few chapatis. But the way to overcome greed is to understand that we have to accept our quota and use it for Krishna. So these are some of the points in this very important end of the chapter. The chapter actually ends, and I'll read the last verse just to ruin whoever has to give the next class on that verse. That is the way of spiritual and godly life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered, or woman. Being so situated, even at the hour of death, one comes to the kingdom of God. So what is that? One who lives free from desires. What's the secret of living free from desires? To make our desires to do connected to Krishna. How do we connect it to Krishna? By good association and by various opportunities for doing service. That's how we give up our false ego. We replace our false ego with self-respect. What is that self-respect? I'm an eternal servant of Krishna. There ain't nothing better under any circumstances. And as the eternal servant of Krishna, then I get that self-respect. And once I have that self-respect, I can be a lamb when I need to be. And like that story I told of the bogey yogi criticizing Prabhupada, I can be a lion. And that's real humility, knowing when to be a lamb and when to be a lion. With that, I'll stop here. And I see my friend Kevin is there too. Nice to see you. And I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions or reflections or comments or criticisms which you can direct to Yadanath.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, thank you. I just wanted to ask a question on the slides that you shared. How does ego relate to insecurity? And one of the points on your slides,
Yeah,
I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
that's a very good question. That means you were listening. You're listening intently to pick that up, because when I was preparing this, I was thinking about that. So, so how does insecurity relate to false ego? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. Those who exert their ego over us, I find, are invariably insecure. Because if they were comfortable in their own skin, they wouldn't want to lord it over others. It's not a comfortable position. But you take, I can't say his name, but our former president, he had a huge false ego. He had, as many psychiatrists and psychologists have shared with me, narcissistic personality disorder, where he thought he was the biggest, most wonderful, and he talked that way. He's one of the most, you can see it in him, one of the most insecure people. When he dealt with his opponents, he would insult their body. So-and-so had small hands, so-and-so was this. He would just make insulting words for all his opponents. And then when his opponents sometimes would surrender to them, he'd beat on them more. And that means he's one of the most insecure people. What are symptoms of insecure people? They go through multiple sexual partners because they're so insecure. I mean, the number of affairs he had, we don't know it. We only know of a few of them, half a dozen, so many more. So you find people who are highly insecure will have this overstated ego. We see it all the time. But people who know they're a servant of Krishna, they're actually have self-respect. And when we have self-respect, I don't want to degrade my body by putting it, by degrading other people's body. It's just something people with self-respect don't do. Does that help? If not, I can go more into this.
Yes, it does really help.
That's
Thank
a
you.
really nice question you asked.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mm.
Are there any other questions here? Yes, Atmaji.
Hare Krishna. One of the slides in your PowerPoint and something that you were talking about was that a devotee is humble before the devotees in Krishna, but not the non-devotees. Okay, and I'm thinking of some scriptural statements from scripture that support that, such as what sorry, now it's slipping my mind. When one should, like in the nectar of instruction, revealing your mind to devotees, or there's or for example, you have the devotee is the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. So I'm just wondering, so those are clearly consistent with that statement in your slide. I was wondering if you have something in mind that says more directly that it's obviously 100% true based on the statements I could come up with. I was wondering if you had some other statements from scripture that are more directly stating that.
Okay, so we were asking, are there statements in scripture, or let's say statements by Prabhupada, that there are times to be humble and times not to be humble? Is that what you're asking?
Basically, yeah, if you don't mind, because it's such an interesting point, and those were the statements that I came up with. I wanted to hear if you have some other.
Well, we can look, one way to look at that, and that's a very appropriate question for this class, very, very appropriate. One way to look at that is to look at examples. And if we go through the stories of Bhagavatam, the Mahabharata, we shall see examples of people who had false humility and had real humility. I mean, if we go to Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is just 500 years old, so very modern, it takes place in our historical. I've shared this story before. It actually, the Chaitanya Charitamrita crosses modern history. Does anybody remember? Maybe I don't remember if I told this class the story, but you know when modern recorded history from the West crossed paths with the Chaitanya Charitamrita? It did. Who was the first explorer from the West in the times of Columbus to make it to India? He was
Marco
looking for
Polo?
India. Who is that?
Marco Polo?
No, he was, good guess, because he was much earlier though. He was early because he came from China's side. Well, from Italy to China and then India. But that's a good one. You're correct, Marco Polo. But somebody, and of course, St. Thomas was there much earlier at time of Christ, one of the apostles. But around the time of Columbus, by the ocean, let me say it that way. Who was the
Vasco da Gama?
Vasco da
Gama.
Gama? Yes. Now, when Vasco da Gama was very typical of the conquistadors from Spain, he had a journalist with him to keep notes of his great conquest because he had a lot of false ego. These notes are locked up in a vault in Portugal. The Portuguese are not anxious for people to see these notes, but somebody got to see them, a scholar. Why? Can anybody guess why these notes are locked up? Yes.
Well, I've guessed 0 for 2, so hopefully it can be 1 for 3 now. Okay, it's a guess, so it's fair to guess wrong. Because he said some things that were praising what he saw there and that wasn't necessarily going to be popular politically with other Westerners.
Okay, well, 0 for 3. Okay, but it was good though. What he did is the atrocities that were committed were so horrible by the conquistadors that later on they don't want that so public. He went to one temple when he landed. He landed in Goa, which they still speak Portuguese in Goa because he landed there. It was a Portuguese colony. And when he got to Goa, he went to a temple. It was a Kali temple. So he saw a statue of a woman being worshipped. It was really perverse looking, but he figured it was Mother Mary. So he walked in and left his boots on, but people tolerated, and he was a little respectful, Mother Mary, I can play dominoes better than you, whatever the Latin is. And so he walks in, and then he realizes it's not Mary, so he kills everyone. So this was the conquistadors. When they went to Mexico, they wiped out the Mayans. The Mayans had thousands of books, still language spoken, so they could all be translated. All but 6 were wiped out. What secrets they had that we'll never know. They burned them. And so the conquistadors, they weren't nice people. You wouldn't want to have them over for dinner, or they might want to cook you for dinner. They really weren't very nice. And so, and his chronicler talks about when he was walking in South India, he was marching inland, and he saw a big parade. And the parade was led by a giant yellowish man, Lord Chaitanya. So that's where modern history from the West crosses at Chaitanya Charitamrita. That is an interesting story. And anyway, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, to answer his question, we find that there are many humble people, like Vasudev Datta is an extreme example. There are many proud people, like the Brahmins, who would go on and on speaking forever, and Lord Chaitanya would just sit there listening and tolerate it, and eventually defeat them. There is a saying, damned by faint praise. So after, what was the name? I just got a mental block, but Lord Chaitanya discussed for days. He went over the one verse for, and at the end of it, Lord Chaitanya.
Ramananda Roy.
Yeah, no, it wasn't, well, Ramananda Roy also. Yeah, it is Ramananda Roy, but there's another Mayavad Lord Chaitanya met.
Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya.
Yes, and at the end of it, Lord Chaitanya says, thank you for your explanation. I listened. He listened very humbly. By the way, I don't understand a word of it. And then he gave his own explanation, defeated him. So that was a case of working in a humble but forceful way. So there are different ways. It's rare that devotees assume the lion-like pose. But if we want to know what to do to answer your question, the best thing is to do is to look at the examples. And we have thousands of examples between the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and the Bhagavatam. And then we have the examples of how Prabhupada did it with us all the time. Prabhupada was really good. I mean, I approached Prabhupada very humbly, and he reciprocated with me in ways that were incredible. I was in a very humble state of mind, and gave me a big hug one time and had me sit with him a few times, and different things. Then when I finally got initiated, I got very proud. And so when next day Prabhupada's giving out the cookies, and I thought, he'll be so happy to see me, after all these years, I'm his disciple now, and and he'll do all these affectionate things he did with me before. And when he handed me the cookie, it was as if I was the clearest plate of glass you could imagine. He looked right through me. I can still see that look. And that burned my false ego in ways that I never thought I would experience this life. Best thing he could have done for me. So Prabhupada in his own dealings would deal when his dealings with Tamal Krishna Maharaj are very good that way. One time he said to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, because Tamal Krishna Maharaj was one of the best managers and leaders in all of ISKCON, without any doubt. There was hardly, when Prabhupada had any trouble, he would usually turn to him. What can you do to fix it? He was that intelligent. And then he wrote his dissertation, which Garuda finished, which is, the unique theological contributions of Prabhupada. But in the beginning, and sometimes he would exhibit that little bit of ego. So one time Prabhupada was with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He said they were in Los Angeles. Maybe it was Watsike Avenue. I don't remember which street. I think La Cienega. They were on La Cienega. And he said to Tamal Krishna, there are millions and millions of planets. And you're on this one planet. Millions of universes with millions of planets. And you're in this one universe. And within this one universe, you're on this one planet. And on this planet, there are thousands, hundreds and hundreds of countries, and you're in this one country. And this country has 50 states and so many cities, and you're in this one city. And in the city, there are so many thousands of streets, and you're on this one street. And on this one street, there's so many buildings, and you're in this one building. And you're just trying to manage this one building, yet you think you're so important. So that was how Prabhupada dealt with false ego in a really perfect way. So it's like that. And all of us, and the reason I bring this up today is all of us will have desires for sense gratification, but our desires are simply because we haven't yet cultivated our spiritual well-being enough. And Prabhupada explained to me, I said, how do I advance? He said, if you get good association, gradually your material desires go down and your spiritual desires go up. That's what it's like. But for all of us who have been around for a while, we know it can be and will be a roller coaster. And then so Prabhupada responded to that, saying, it's just like a child learning to walk, sometimes a little stumbling, but you get up and you continue walking. And what he specifically says, and don't ever, ever leave good association. And then you're guaranteed success. So any other questions, comments, reflections, criticisms? Yes, Yadunath.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much. It's always wonderful. You always have these wonderful inside stories and behind the scenes perspectives, and it's thank you for sharing all of what you know.
Why don't you stop there before the insult comes?
Yeah, you'd be better off. You're right. Okay.
Okay.
No, wait a minute. I have something to say. I will not be silenced. You said at one point that we have to give up our desire for sense gratification, and then you had this addendum there to some degree, and you kept going. And now the verse says a person who's given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, and who's given up all sense of proprietorship, devoid of false ego, which is a really tall order for a lot of us. So can you expound on this idea where you added that little, to some degree, and the shastra sounds so emphatic, like totally you can't have any more?
That's a nice question. The last sentence in the verse, he or she alone can attain peace. So because we haven't given it all up, and we're not always peaceful. Prabhupada was always peaceful. Sometimes for the sake of service, he could roar like a lion, and he could, it would exhibit the emotions of every person. Sometimes cry, sometimes laugh, sometimes worry, but he always had that inner peace about him, no matter what the circumstances. Still a person, but he had the inner peace. So here it says, he alone can attain real peace. Well, none of us may have real peace. Some of us might, but if we don't, then that means we still have some, we're still working on developing our consciousness. So one time I was having fun with the Veda base, which has all of Prabhupada's words in it. And I started counting. And I wanted to see one phrase that Prabhupada used, how many times he used it. And I was searching for it different ways. And I stopped counting at 150 because Prabhupada said something 150 times. And yeah, pretty much, there's very little to interpret. And the phrase was, Krishna consciousness is a gradual process. So when we get initiated, we often think, oh, I'm at the end. But the word initiation literally means beginning. You initiate something. I initiated a phone call. I began it. I don't initiate a phone call by hanging up. Oh, yeah, you know, you initiate by beginning. So we think when we get initiated, you know, I've seen it so many times, somebody gets initiated and gets pure devotee syndrome, where they know better than everyone. And it happens to a lot. I mean, we just laugh at it. I mean, it happened to me. We all, you know, we go through these phases. So it's a gradual process. So the important point is not, am I fully Krishna conscious? Am I fully free of sense gratification? That's the wrong question. Because if I'm not, then I get very depressed and hopeless. So the real question is, what direction am I going? Is my taste improving? Nam ruchi, as that verse I quoted from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati said. Is my taste improving? Am I getting a higher taste? Do I want to chant more? Do I want to read more? Is it improving? If it's improving, then I know I'm going the right direction. If it's not improving, it's like a test you give yourself. I mean, we all have done this test ourselves. Did I eat enough? And all of us have sometimes continued eating when we did eat enough. And then we get the stomach ache and hurts afterwards. Reminds me of that joke. Somebody asked Yogi Berra, do you want your pizza cut into 6 or 8 slices? And he goes, 6, I can never eat 8 slices. So we all will have it where where the saying goes, our eyes are bigger than our stomach. And if we eat too much, we get the joy of instant karma. So we know, oops, this isn't working. So what does this mean? It means we need to be mindful. We need to be self-aware. If we're dullards, we're not going to realize, oh, I'm really not doing very well in my Krishna consciousness, or this part of it really works well. And so it's a lot of it is being self-aware. And this is precisely what Krishna is teaching Arjuna. In this chapter, he's laying out the Gita, saying, these are the things you look for. Then later on, he gives them modes of nature. And these are all the symptoms. Why does he give all the symptoms of the modes of nature? So Arjuna can do the self-test and see which mode is ruling him. And if he wants to leave the battlefield, he was thinking that's a mode of goodness. And after Krishna described it to him, he realized that's a mode of ignorance. So it's self-awareness. So he's setting the stage. And as we go on, there's all kinds of succinct, pithy instructions that every one of us can be used to judge where we're at. Did I eat enough? Now, if I don't eat enough, I get weak, then that's not very good. And Krishna says in the Gita, don't eat too little. And if I eat all 8 slices, or let's say 6 slices, because I could never eat 8. But if I eat all 6 slices of the pizza and I got a real bad bellyache afterwards, that's another self-test. I was a glutton. So we all, it's a matter of awareness. Prabhupada had keen awareness. He noticed everything about him. When he walked by on a morning walk in Juhu, and one day there was one building and somebody on the 10th floor was standing there every day. And one day Prabhupada walked by with the same group of devotees and the guy wasn't there. And Prabhupada said, "Where is he? Where is he?" And devotees would be wondering, who are you talking about? "The guy up there. He's there every day." Nobody else noticed there was someone there. So it's a matter of increasing our consciousness, which means awareness. So that's why there's so much psychology in the Gita to help us be more self-aware. Does that answer your question, Yadanath Prabhu?
Yes, thank you. It's very good, except a little too much pizza talk. It's a Ekadasi up here in New York.
Oh, it's a Ekadasi here too. I know. Yeah.
Apart from that, it was perfect.
Yeah. No, that is an issue there. Yeah, I know. Yeah, time for some potatoes. Okay. Any other questions or comments or reflection? And Bhakti Shasha, is there anything coming in from Facebook, YouTube, or the ethereal, whatever out there?
No, we don't have like those.
Yeah. By the way, you'll appreciate, Shasha, you're from Russia?
Ukraine.
Same thing, except don't tell that to Russians. I just gave giving a class in Russia. They're so smart, these Russians. The ones who like Ukraine, I mean. Yeah, with Bhaktivedanta Swami, he's so smart. The Russian Bhaktivedanta Institute is really flourishing. We kind of helping them get started. They're flourishing, doing such brilliant work. Smart people. Okay, any other questions or comments? I'll pause for a moment.
Hare Krishna, Brahmatirtha Prabhu.
Always great to see you, Andrea. You're in Gainesville now?
Yes, still in Gainesville.
Your smile always makes me happy.
Oh, thank you. Well,
I can see that you are a self-satisfied person by your smile.
oh, I don't know about that. I actually meant to take a screenshot of the slide that you had about the self-confidence and everything because I wanted to, but it's okay. I'll go back to the YouTube video and get it. I just wanted to give my appreciation for this class because a lot of times, first off, you're always like Yelena said, you always have such amazing trivia, like the Life Comes from Life book and all these other ways with a sense of humor. But I feel like a lot of times we don't talk about the self-confidence issue in terms of where it goes with the ego and more of the psychology of it all. And this really helps a lot because, as you said, it is something that it's not just college students. A lot of us that are older also struggle with like anxiety and all these kind of mental issues that come up in trying to deal with our relations with others. And my question is more about, in ISKCON, at least I've never been to, I don't know if there is, nobody's ever talked about like etiquette, if there is etiquette. So like, is that something that we should be thinking about? Like, how do we relate to senior Vaishnavas? How do we relate to, potential gurus? Like, I've never heard anybody talk about those things. And is it something that we really should know about so that we're not creating offenses needlessly?
Well, that's a very appropriate question. And etiquette. There are two sides of etiquette that don't work. One is no etiquette. Yeah, unless you're a New Yorker, then that's okay. And the other is too much etiquette. And if there's too much etiquette where everything becomes a hierarchy, then there's no relationships. And hey, Ratavaja Swami, welcome. And if there's too little etiquette, then we become very uncultured. For example, when I grew up, I would never call my uncles anything but Uncle so-and-so, never by their name. Little things of etiquette like that, because it develops respect and relationships. So among devotees, we have etiquette. But there are some, let's say, swamis who I offer great respect to at quite a distance. If you see what I mean, because I really don't like what they say or how they say it. That can happen. And there's some, let's say, like Radhanath Swami. So he treats me as an equal and I treat him as my superior. So there are different etiquettes. So etiquette is I would rather have a little too much etiquette than none. But too much etiquette that can stifle relationships. When Prabhupada was with his godbrothers, some were senior, some were junior, but they would be joking all the time with each other. It was in Bengali, so I couldn't understand. Finally, I found out one time what they were joking about. They were remembering when they used to be back in the old days, all the funny nicknames they had for each other. Just like we do. Hey, Shorty, Big Nose, or what, I don't know, whatever the names might be. They all had nicknames for each other. They were just joking and laughing about it because it was funny. But if it's hurtful, it's not funny. So there's a certain amount of friendliness among devotees and camaraderie, and there's also certain etiquette. Temples that have very sharp lines of etiquette, then the friendships are not developed. Temples with no etiquette, the culture's not developed. So just like Krishna says, I'll paraphrase Krishna. He says, don't eat too much, don't eat too little. I say, don't have too much etiquette, don't have too little. To paraphrase Krishna. That's how I see it. Others may see it differently. So, if somebody's a Swami, I offer respect, sometimes at quite a distance. And sometimes, I want to grab their footsies. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'll say it anyway, because Sritapaja Swami knows there's very little filter between my tongue and my brain. I was at a GBC meeting a few weeks ago for some matter, and some of it was just going on a little bit. And one of my good friends is a Swami on there and a good friend of Sritapaja Swami. So I keep whenever I'm speaking, he sends me a little joke to see if he can crack me up. And I said, when he speaks, I send him a little joke, see if I can make him crack up. So I said, there's a normal relationship. But if I was ever with him, he's a sannyasi and a GBC man. I'm going to make sure he eats before me and offer him all the proper respects. So we have to have a balance. If we're unclear of the balance, we tend to go on the side of etiquette just to be safe. But too much, myself, I much prefer just to be friends with everyone. It's just easier for me. One time, I've told this story before, but one time in the 80s, it was common for the gurus to get a lot of donations then. There were only a few gurus in ISKCON, a lot of donations. So one time, Hridayanand Raj, it's his birthday, so disciples were giving him checks. And I'm standing next to him with a bag, collecting the checks in the bag. And he turns to me and he says, oh, it's so painful to hear everyone say all these things about me. It's so painful. It's really hard to sit here and listen to all this kind of praise. And I turned and whispered to him, well, you can cry all the way to the bank. But and then one time, about 4 years ago, Radhanath Swami and I went on a half-a-day walk. And what he wanted to discuss with me, how difficult it was. And he was revealing his mind, how difficult it was, because he's now a big guru and people say all these things of him. And every day he has to wash it off him so he doesn't believe it. And he was telling me his inner struggle. He just wanted to reveal his mind to, someone with, like I said, some friendly relation, how difficult it is to have to listen to this all day. And there's not a day that goes by that he doesn't have to, you might say, remind himself that this isn't true, that he's just a humble servant of Prabhupada. That's very, and I was really, he really kept opening his heart up how difficult it is. So there's the etiquette. Disciples have to do it, but everyone also needs their friends too. So it doesn't, it's difficult. It's very difficult to accept that kind of etiquette. I hope that answered your question on it. Any other questions or comments? I think time's almost up. I don't pay attention to these things so much. Ritavaja Swami, would you like to say something?
Something.
That was good.
That's it. You always do that to me. The same
I
thing you
do.
do to me every time. So
I do.
I'm happy. I just, when you were talking about etiquette and culture, I do remember Bhakti True Swami once said, because we have a lack of culture, Vaishnava culture in our society, he said we need the etiquette because we do lack of culture. And so we just do the best we can, like you said,
We definitely need the etiquette. And that's why I said, if we don't know which side to go on, better to fault on a little too much etiquette than not enough.
It's kind of like the Chaitanya Charitamrita says, do not praise someone or don't criticize them, but of the two, you can praise them.
Yeah. If you want to criticize someone, first praise them 4 or 5 times and then criticize. Sometimes that's why management is so hard, because management means criticize. And management means, to go back to the pizza thing, on Ekadasi pizza, it's a different kind of dough. And on this Ekadasi pizza, you have your 8 slices and there's 12 people to feed. And that's what management's about. It's always like that. It's always. So what do you do? How do you divide up resources? And it's very important that if we keep good etiquette, even if the decisions that are made by management don't work, we'll still be respectful. There's no perfect managers. Just never happens. Just the way of this world. Okay. Thank you, Maharaj. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Anything else, or what's next on this, Atmaji?
Just chanting Hare Krishna for a couple minutes.
Okay, that's a nice thing to do. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me into your homes all over the place. Miguel has this amazing picture. That's interesting. Quite, yeah, I like that. Okay, I'm happy to see you all. And oh, hey, Kevin put a very interesting comment. I like that, Kevin. I don't know if that's true, but it's really good. Very, very good. Could be so. Very smart. Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you all very much. It's an honor, a privilege, and to be where it all began with all of you. And I wish you all to stay safe and healthy in these very weird, odd times. And these odd times are there's this, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, or to quote him actually, it's the best of times and the worst of times. So in many ways, the Kali Yuga has really gotten very ugly in age of conflict and quarrel. And what better time than to go inward and become more self-controlled on our own so that we can share with others. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Devotees would like to join me expressing my gratitude for Brahmatirtha Prabhu for his association this evening and sharing his Krishna conscious understanding, etc. Now is a great time. Brahmatirtha Prabhu ki jai.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
Beautiful.